headlines on this Thursday afternoon. Leaders of Seoul, Washington and Tokyo held talks on the sidelines of the NATO summit in Madrid, underscoring the importance of the trilateral framework in addressing regional security challenges, including Pyongyang's provocations. And addressing the NATO summit in Madrid, President Yoon Suk-yeol called for a broader collective stance against North Korea's missile and nuclear weapons ambitions. Meanwhile, torrential downpours here in the capital region are disrupting traffic, with numerous expressways and bridges closed off amid flooding. Hello and welcome. You're watching the Daily Report. It's Thursday afternoon, June 30th here in South Korea. We start in the capital region where torrential downpours are disrupting traffic amid the risk of flooding. For more on this, I have our Yoon standing by. Yoon, so the monsoon is making landfall here in this part of the world, right?
That's right, Sunny. For the first time in 2 years, Jamsu Bridge, which crosses the Han River in central Seoul, has been closed off. And that's because authorities have opened up around 10 water gates at the Paltang Dam as a precautionary step to prevent flooding. As of 9 o'clock this morning, Paltang Dam was discharging close to 7,000 tons of water per second. The last time Jamsu Bridge was closed off in the summer of 2020, it was completely underwater for 10 days. And back then, water levels peaked at over 11 meters. Right now, the water level isn't that high, but it's still over 6.5 meters, submerging part of the bridge. And large streams have also been overflowing with water, closing off some highways. Dongbu Expressway, a 32-kilometer-long road connecting the northeast of the capital to Gyeonggi-do province, has been closed off yet again. Officials had closed the road this morning, but they reopened it at around 11:30 a.m. when it seemed like the sky was clearing up. Just 3 hours later, they then closed it once again because the stream next to the road was overflowing. Because of this situation, we've been seeing major traffic congestion. As of 9 a.m., cars in Seoul were driving at an average speed level of just 14.7 kilometers per hour.
Right. Yeah. Do we know how long this wet weather will persist?
Well, Sunny, a few days ago, the Korea Meteorological Administration originally predicted that by this afternoon, skies would start to clear up. But during a briefing this morning, they said it's really hard to accurately predict the weather in the coming days because of the rapidly moving rain clouds. What they're thinking so far is that between now and tomorrow morning, we'll see 150 millimeters of rain in the greater capital region. Chungcheongdo and Gangwon-do province, on the other hand, will see less rain. And over the weekend, the weather will take a completely different turn. It's expected to be very humid and incredibly hot. Then from next Monday, we're expecting to see rain again, and this time towards the southern part of the country. Officials have also asked people to stay away from streams and rivers and to avoid mountainous regions at risk of landslides. That's all I have for you now. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Yoon, thank you for that coverage. That was our Yoon with the latest on the weather front here in South Korea. Meanwhile, over in Spain, President Yoon Suk-yeol partook in a planned trilateral summit with his U.S. and Japanese counterparts. Now, the three-way talks among Seoul, Washington and Tokyo are the first in almost 5 years. My colleague Moon Gon-young, who is part of the Presidential Press Corps, files this report.
Seoul, Washington, Tokyo security cooperation is restored as of today. This is President Yoon's aide traveling with the president to Madrid. A historic trilateral where the leaders discussed enhancing cooperation throughout the Indo-Pacific. This is a White House readout on the first gathering of its type in nearly 5 years. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, U.S. President Joe Biden, and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida met on the sidelines of a NATO summit in Madrid as Biden bids to improve frosted ties between the two major U.S. allies.
북한의 핵미사일 위협이 고도화되고 국제정세 불안정성 커진 상황에서 한미일의 협력의 중요성은 더욱 커졌습니다.
Our trilateral cooperation, in my view, is essential to achieving our shared objective, including a complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and a free and open Indo-Pacific.
The deterrence capabilities of the Japan-US and US-ROK alliances need to be upgraded as part of the essential effort to strengthen the trilateral partnership between Japan, the US, and ROK.
The previous day, Yoon and Kishida spoke for the first time, albeit for a few minutes, at a dinner hosted by King Philippe VI of Spain, a rare conversation between countries often at loggerheads over their shared history who have not had a formal summit since 2019. The two also rubbed shoulders at the first four-way meeting with their counterparts from Australia and New Zealand, dubbed AP4, at which the four Asia-Pacific leaders agreed that security in the Europe and the Indo-Pacific cannot be separated. Relations between the neighbors deteriorated to the worst in years under South Korea's previous administration, with spats over territory and history leading the two nations to hurt trade and call off an intel sharing pact. Yoon, though, has expressed a desire to repair ties, and Kishida has also seemed to respond favorably. Experts say the Yoon-Kishida encounter has upped the chance of a bilateral between the two leaders after the upper house elections in Japan. 문건영, Arirang News, Madrid.
Right, as Konyang has just said, pundits believe prospects of a summit between the leaders of South Korea and Japan are looking quite bright. Our Kim Dami has more on this optimistic outlook.
Even after multiple encounters between the leaders of South Korea and Japan at 2022 NATO, there was no much anticipated bilateral summit to defrost the currently icy Seoul-Tokyo relations. But experts say not all hope is lost.
The fact that the South Korean leader himself expressed his will to improve relations is something that Japan can think of positively. And when the political situation allows, conditions for deeper discussions will be created.
One of the political situations, for instance, could be Japan's upper house election next month. In fact, experts are convinced that the very first Yoon-Kishida summit is highly likely to take place afterward. However, a two-track approach that isolates historical disputes and highlights a common interest in solidarity based on economic security may be a more appropriate way to mend ties between the two countries.
The Yoon administration and the Kishida government share similar diplomatic interests on China, North Korea issues and alliances, beefing up cooperation between South Korea, US and Japan, and participating in the IPAF. More active involvement will broaden Seoul-Tokyo coordination.
Plus, security ties between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo have never been tighter than they are now amid concerns that Pyongyang is on the verge of resuming nuclear tests. Another expert points out that trilateral cooperation on security driven by the U.S. will allow Seoul-Tokyo ties to improve.
The South Korean government will become closer with the US, and during that process, South Korea and Japan will actively play along with Washington's East Asia policy, which will also allow Seoul and Tokyo to become closer.
Hurdle after hurdle lie ahead for South Korea-Japan relations, namely taking care of possible South Korean court rulings resulting in the liquidation of the Japanese firm's assets in the country over Japan's wartime forced labor. But the hunt for diplomatic solutions is expected to continue, with the South Korean government planning to launch a joint public-private body to address the issue. Kim Dami, Arirang News.
Also in Spain, NATO leaders have decried Russia's brutality against Ukraine while also directing attention to China's assertive posture. Our Kim Yo-san has more on the latest concerns raised by this Western security alliance.
On the first day of the NATO summit in Madrid, alliance leaders sent a strong message to Russia, calling the country a, quote, direct threat.
It makes clear that Russia poses the most significant and direct threat to our security.
The leaders condemned Moscow's cruelty in Ukraine. They also vowed to provide long-term support for war-torn Ukraine. NATO's statement came as part of its new strategic concept, which was unveiled Wednesday. For the first time, a NATO strategic document entails the challenges posed by China toward NATO's security interests and values.
We now face an era of strategic competition. We see a deepening strategic partnership between Moscow and Beijing. And China's growing assertiveness and its coercive policies have consequences for the security of allies and our partners.
The NATO chief also added that Beijing is not an adversary but a serious challenge. While previous strategic documents had directed harsh language against Russia, China had never been mentioned before. Nevertheless, the official turn by NATO comes as the U.S. is increasingly on guard against Beijing. Meanwhile, during the summit, U.S. President Joe Biden announced that Washington is bolstering its military presence in Europe to respond to what he called a changed security environment. This, he said, includes establishing a permanent presence in Poland. Hailing it an historic event, the alliance leaders also welcomed the invitation for Sweden and Finland to join the NATO. Kim Hye-sun, Arirang News.
And acknowledging that security challenges in modern society need to be addressed collectively, President Yoon Suk-yeol called on NATO members to place their weight behind efforts here to rid the Korean peninsula of nuclear weapons. Our Yoon Jung-min reports.
The international community must show that its will for denuclearization is stronger than that of North Korea to develop nuclear and missile programs. That reportedly was the message from South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol on Wednesday at the NATO summit, taking the podium as the seventh speaker for about 3 minutes. He called for cooperation and support from the Western Alliance Group and Asia-Pacific partners on North Korea issues. President Yoon also called North Korea's nuclear and missile programs an outright violation of UN Security Council resolutions and a serious security challenge. Expressing hope for close cooperation with NATO on economic security and cyberspace, the South Korean president also touched upon the group's new strategic concept, adding security challenges nowadays cannot be dealt with by a single nation. That message was echoed earlier too, alluding to the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
정치 군사적인 안보에서 공군망을 포함한 이런 경제 안보와 이런 포괄적인 안보로 안보 개념이 지금 바뀌어 가고, 그리고 특정 지역의 그 영내 그 안보 상황이 전 세계적인 파급을 주기 때문에 그 특정 지역의 동맹만으로는 그 안보 위기가 해결되지 않는다는.
But he dismissed concerns when asked about potential backlash from China over South Korea's attendance at the summit.
특정 국가를 거명하기보다 이런 자유와 인권, 법치를 중시하는 그런 규범에 입각한 질서가 존중되는 그런 협력을 우리 나토 국가들과 인태 국가들이 함께 연대해서 만들어 가야 된다.
President Yoon, who is the first South Korean head of state to attend a NATO summit, yet again stressed the importance of global solidarity for freedom and peace. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Also on President Yoon's agenda over in Spain are bilateral exchanges with his European counterparts that go beyond security concerns to sales contracts. Our Ji-young explains.
The key words at the South Korean president's first NATO summit: sales diplomacy. Through bilateral meetings with world leaders in Spain on the NATO sidelines this week, President Yoon has been promoting the country's exports, its major economic driver. The presidential office says that economic growth in China, South Korea's biggest trade partner, is slowing down, so there's a need to diversify and find alternative markets.
Europe is the next biggest market in the world after the United States. Europe's GDP is around $17 trillion, similar to China's. Europe is our third largest trading partner.
President Yoon is looking for deals to export nuclear power plants as part of his pledge to make the country a nuclear reactor superpower.
First, we will go all out to win deals to build nuclear power plants in the countries that are about to choose contractors, including Poland and the Czech Republic.
He added that during President Yoon's meeting with Polish President Andrzej Duda, Yoon emphasized Seoul's advanced nuclear technology proven through the Baraka project in the United Arab Emirates. Also, South Korea's industry minister Lee Chang-yang met on Tuesday with his Czech counterpart Josef Sikila. During that meeting, 10 contracts were signed on nuclear energy and hydrogen between companies from the two countries, including the auto giant Hyundai Motor. One expert on nuclear power says projects in Poland and the Czech Republic could bring in billions of dollars to the South Korean economy.
Should South Korea export nuclear power plants to Europe, it could be deemed as the world's leading country in the field both in name and reality.
He added that the Netherlands and the UK also suggested cooperating with South Korea in building nuclear power plants in their countries. Another main export the president is focusing on is arms sales, for which demand is rising amid the war in Ukraine. The presidential office says weapons exports to Poland will likely be the first fruits of President Yoon's sales diplomacy, as the two leaders have discussed this matter intensively. South Korea is already among the world's top 10 arms exporters, but a defense industry expert says that weapons exports to NATO members will help South Korea gain a competitive edge in the industry.
If those planned exports lead to positive results, some expect the South Korean defense market to have the second largest share in the global market after the US.
With the UK and the Netherlands, South Korea is looking to strengthen supply chains in advanced industries, including semiconductors and batteries. 엄지영, Arirang News.
Staying in Madrid, Korean immigrants as well as nationals living in Spain were invited to a dinner Wednesday night by President Yoon, during which he pledged support that is not hindered by the physical distance between the two countries. Our Kim Do-yeon has more.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol asked Korea's international community to join him in creating a new South Korea as he met with overseas Koreans for the first time outside of Seoul. Hosting a dinner party with around 100 Korean citizens and Korean immigrants to Spain on Wednesday night local time, the president also promised more support from their homeland.
동포 여러분들의 어려움을 살피고 시대에 맞게 법령과 제도도 정비해 나가겠습니다. 현지에서 손쉽게 체감 가능한 디지털 중심의 교민 행정 서비스를 제공하도록 최선을 다하겠습니다. 그리고 후손들이 민족 정체성을 지키면서 글로벌 인재로 성장해 나갈 수 있도록 차세대 동포의 교육에 대한 지원을 아끼지 않겠습니다.
While pledging to make them proud to have a South Korean background, he also asked them to continue working with one another to further advance the Korean community in Spain. According to the Korean-Spanish organization in Spain, currently there are around 4,500 Korean citizens or Korean immigrants that have obtained Spanish citizenship, saying that Koreans, no matter where they are, will be valued preciously. President Yoon praised the community for enduring the pandemic together.
동포 여러분, 스페인 동포 사회는 도전 정신으로 시작되었습니다. 태권도 사범, 병아리 감별사로 이 땅에서 기반을 닦았고 이역만리 원양업에 종사하며 카나리아 제도로 진출하였습니다. 선배들의 도전 정신은 후배들의 귀감이 되었으며 동포 사회의 진취적인 발전으로 이어졌습니다.
President Yoon also took the opportunity to underscore his trip to Madrid for the NATO summit. Saying the values of NATO align with South Korea's new government, he says South Korea will contribute to global society as a leader. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Right, and that ends part one of the Daily Report. We'll be back with more coverage in a few minutes. Stay with us.
South Korea's experience in tackling COVID-19 and introduced a Korean New Day. A Korean survivor of Japan's wartime slavery met with
extraordinary climate crisis and pledged to work with the EU to tackle the challenge.
The objective of its North Korea policy is
protesters gathering across the country to peacefully demand an end to hate and violence.
Arirang, what matters?
right now. Maybe I had a drink or two, but this somehow feels like it's forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Maybe this is forever. All my friends are here having fun and feeling good right now. Forever.
Welcome back. On Viewpoint today, we touch upon the ongoing pandemic as well as the spread of monkeypox across non-endemic countries. For more, I have Professor David Kwok from Suncheon University. Professor Kwok, it's good to have you here.
Hi, Sunny. Thanks for having me.
I also have Dr. Kim Seung-taek from Institute Pasteur Korea. Dr. Kim, it's been a while. Welcome back.
Good afternoon. Good to be here.
Right, Professor Kwok, some are saying that our daily COVID-19 tally appears to be stalling and that a resurgence is likely as early as late summer or early autumn. Do you share this outlook?
Well, I actually do, and not only that, I think we're already seeing a slight uptick in the graph of the daily confirmation cases. It does not necessarily mean it's going to go all the way up to create a resurgence, but I do agree that there is that possibility that we might be seeing resurgence possibly in the near future. But there's a huge confounding factor that we differ from many other countries around the world in that regard, is the fact that we've not only achieved high levels of antibody among the population through vaccination, but also through natural infection. Many people in the past a few months or so have been infected and they created or they were gained, so to speak, of the immunity against COVID-19. And currently, the immunity that is created from natural infection as opposed to vaccination, supposedly they stay a little longer and they are expected to create a stronger and more vast or diverse types of protection against COVID-19 when compared to vaccination alone. So not only through vaccination, because we have achieved a huge or very high level of immunity, I think and I foresee very humbly that there is a possibility the next wave, the resurgence that is expected, might actually be much smaller in size than expected. It might be something of an endemic size. It might be something of a very manageable size. And I'm dearly hoping that will happen. But because also that there is that possibility a resurgence can happen, we still need to prepare ourselves for any sort of levels of resurgences through many, many different tactics. But obviously, one strong point that we need to take as a method would be through vaccination also.
You're right, of course. And our efforts right now have been recognized by Bloomberg. I mean, the COVID-19 resilience ranking, we've topped that ranking for this month, that is. Now, Dr. Kim, on the vaccine front, there has been a commendable advance here in South Korea. We have a homegrown COVID-19 vaccine available. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, that's the vaccine was developed by the SK Biosciences, and the name of the vaccine is GBP510, or it is called the SkyCoV-1. So the vaccine is basically very similar to the vaccine that was developed by the Novavax. So it's basically just a subunit vaccine. So it would be probably more safe than the other vaccines we have seen for like mRNA vaccines and virus-vectored vaccine. So if I explain a little bit about the vaccine, is that this is an outcome of some efforts of some multiple partners. So basically the original vaccine design was actually provided by the Institute for the Protein Design at the University of Washington. And then there's some adjuvant, which is also co-administered with the vaccine. That adjuvant was provided by the GSK. And then in terms of the funding, the Gates Foundation and CEPI supported all those development as well as the Korean government. And obviously, just SK Biosciences led some clinical development. So in terms of clinical trials, it was actually a little bit different compared to the some previous clinical trials. Previously, like Pfizer, Moderna, and others, they just conducted very typical clinical trials. Like they enrolled like 30 or 40,000 people, and then just giving shots or some placebo, and then just compare and compare the efficacy and the safety, things like that. But here, actually, the clinical trial was actually a little bit just delayed compared to some front runners. So it was not really easy to enroll all those the participants in the clinical trial. So what they chose to do that is sort of just a comparative study. So basically, they compared their vaccine against the some AstraZeneca vaccine. Obviously, AstraZeneca actually just pleased to just support such kind of a comparative study. So in the end, what they found out is that all the immunological response parameter like antibodies and then T-cell response was a little bit just superior to those of the AstraZeneca vaccine. So now based on those data, now just MFDA, which is DSCC, which is a Korean FDA, approved based on such data.
Right. And Dr. Kim, what has been shared about the potential side effects of SkyCoV-1?
Well, no vaccine has there's no vaccine that has no side effects, but some comparatively the subunit, just a recombinant type of vaccine, has known to be has less side effect compared to like some mRNA-based vaccines or virus-vector vaccine. And then the experts said they have a clinically acceptable safety profile, which is probably just a mild or just moderate, and it would be okay. And also considering some side effects that we actually observed after Novavax vaccine, is pretty much just negligible.
Right, I see. Meanwhile, Professor Kwok, over in the US, children as young as 6 months old are now eligible for COVID-19 vaccines. And that being said, and also keeping in mind the expected COVID-19 resurgence here on the domestic front, do you suppose Korea needs to adopt a similar strategy? And if that is the case, how do we rally support for vaccination for young children?
Well, that's a quite tough question that how we should come about rallying the support for the vaccination. But I do definitely agree that we should also implement the age limit to lowering it to 6 months or above, because it currently had been shown to be safely injected in those younger children. And not only that, they are also shown to protect them from getting COVID-19. Foreseeing the possibility of resurgence, let's remember that these really young generations have not been exposed to COVID-19 as much as the adults did. But also the fact that they are now prone to, let's say, going into more social situations, such as those of kindergarten and those daily care facilities, there's a possibility that they actually might be more easily exposed to COVID-19 than the already protected their adults or their parents. So, and at this state, not knowing the outcomes or consequences of even milder cases among younger children, I think it's better to protect them more safely with vaccination rather than just having them being able to be exposed to the COVID-19 itself. Now, going back to the original topic, how we should come about really rallying for the better inoculation rate, I think it still has to remain in the factual information. I think the government, and not only the government, but also the media sources, we really have to announce and advertise only the factual information so that people, especially those guardians of these younger generations, would educationally choose to inoculate them, to protect them, rather than hearing all these wrongful information, wrongful sources, which could put them in a very biased position, preventing or rejecting the ideas of inoculation based on really wrongful sources. I don't think that should, I think that should not take place at this moment, but rather only the factual information should be given so that people can make their own decision to inoculate their younger generations.
Right, as you were saying, informed decisions to inoculate their children then. And Dr. Kim, what is your advice with regard to booster doses or booster shots, especially amid widespread concerns of waning protection by this coming autumn?
Well, actually, several weeks ago, the US CDC actually recommended the fourth shot. And then they now, in the US, actually, they now start to just regard the fourth shot program as the sort of just a standard vaccination. But many scientists actually concerned about such a decision because the fourth shot does not have any just a very convincing, strong just scientific evidence. Compared to the three-shot program, there was actually strong just evidence that the very just broad and then very just deep just immunological responses for fourth shot. So there's some such a concern. And then regarding some vaccination, we actually expect two different the immune responses after vaccination. The first one is antibody production, and the second one is cellular immunity. The antibody production is actually we know that this is very short-lived. So after like 3 or 4 months, it just declines substantially. So we lose a substantial part of just a neutralization capacity. By the way, some cellular immunity is robust and then pretty just long-lasting. So without the first shot, we actually expect some long-lasting cellular immunity would just protect us from any severe COVID-19. So I think for the booster shot, maybe if we have to consider like a fourth shot, maybe we could consider such kind of the shot for some vulnerable just people. For example, like some elderly people or some just compromised patient. So in that case, they might get some advantage by the booster shot. At least by giving booster shot, their antibody just production will just go up, and it will last through at least for 3 or just 4 months. But just for any regular regular shot program for anti-people, I really quite just doubtful. And then for the probably long-term projection would be, well, we might just consider some annual shot, like some flu shot, or we might need any just the booster shot program anymore, because somehow this virus will just go on to the process of being endemic just coronavirus, such as other we have actually know the other endemic coronavirus. For that endemic coronavirus, we do not get any vaccination. So by just somehow just being multiply just exposed to such some COVID-19 these viruses, we might get some more enhancing just immunity. This actually maybe some other just a new emerging variant or just a coronavirus might just work as some booster shot as well.
Right, I see. And given our concerns about a resurgence this autumn, Professor Kwak, do you envision perhaps a return back to tough COVID-19 restrictions to contain such a resurgence?
Well, I think it's connected to the confounding factor that I mentioned earlier. If the resurgence happens to be so small that we don't really have to worry about it, obviously there's not going to be a stricter social distancing guidelines implemented. But if the resurgence, and I hope not that happens, that it's big enough that we really have to block our social transmission by socially distancing ourselves, I would take a rough guess that we would possibly go back to the strict social distancing rules and regulations that we used to have. I don't think there's any other guidelines that we can actually omit in the purpose of blocking the transmission. So if we were to actually go back to keeping the strict social distancing guideline, we will go probably all the way back.
Right, I see. And now, Dr. Kim, beyond COVID-19, I would like to direct your attention to monkeypox. The World Health Organization says monkeypox has been found in over 50 countries with at least 4,000 confirmed cases, including one here in South Korea. But regardless of this reality, the global health body says that monkeypox is not a public health emergency as of now. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think I have to say that some general public, just because of the COVID-19, we are just somehow just very alert upon any just emerging just pathogen. So that's why we are actually very much concerned about these new just the monkeypox viruses. Otherwise, we would not probably just maybe most of the people would just ignore this monkeypox. And then in terms of just any potential just a pandemic, I think just the chances are very low. The reason is that this virus is transmitted only by some close contact. And this is not like just COVID-19. The COVID-19 is actually transmitted by the viruses. It's actually airborne, by droplet or just airborne, just the disease. But this monkeypox is not actually respiratory disease. This has to be with some very close contact. And in addition to that, we have, although this was actually developed against the smallpox, but we have very good, still just vaccines and drugs available. So unlike the COVID-19, you remember that like 2 years ago, we did not have anything at all. We somehow just come up with some diagnostic tools, but other than that, no vaccines and no drugs. But this year, at least we have some weapons to just to deal with.
Right, and very briefly speaking, Professor Kwok, the US is now offering COVID-19 monkeypox vaccines, that is in states with mounting caseloads. Do you foresee a similar scenario here in South Korea?
I actually don't foresee that at all, because as Dr. Kim mentioned, the number itself is way too low to be considered something of endangering globally scale of a pandemic issue. I think maybe if at all somebody needs to be vaccinated, those people would be the medical sector people who would be possibly exposed to the virus more easily than others, but also we have to consider the demographics of the transmission. So those people who can be exposed to this particular virus much easier than others may be considered for vaccination, but I don't think the national scale of vaccination should be considered at this moment.
Right, I see. All right, that is reassuring to know then. Professor Kwok, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Dr. Kim, thank you very much for your insights. On the local labour front, there has been a 5% rise in the minimum wage for next year, which translates to roughly 9,600 won an hour. Our Han Sung-woo reports.
The Minimum Wage Commission has set South Korea's minimum hourly wage for next year at 9,620 Korean won, or about $7.40. That's a 5% increase from the current minimum of around $7, a decision neither the business community nor labor unions are completely happy with, amid rising inflation and living costs. The two sides, despite rounds of negotiations and revised proposals, failed to reach an agreement Wednesday night.
A minimum wage hike is essential to move forward, to create new momentum for resolving the polarization of inequality.
It's tough on businesses these days. The minimum wage must be stabilized for small and medium-sized enterprise just scraping by.
This meant public interest representatives had to intervene and put their own proposal up for a vote. Out of 27 members of the Trilateral panel, 12 voted in support, 1 voted against, and there were 10 abstentions. 4 labor representatives from the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions refused to take part at all. It's the first time in 8 years the Minimum Wage Commission's review has met the legal deadline. The Labor Ministry has until August 5th to formally announce the new wage floor, which will take effect on January 1st. Han Sung-woo, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, economic data for the month of May appears mixed, with a rebound in industrial output but a retreat in consumer spending. Our Shin Ha-young has more on these findings.
South Korea's overall industrial output in May rebounded from April thanks to the service industry. Data from Statistics Korea on Thursday shows that the country's industrial production index in May reached 117.1, up 0.8% from April. It was led by an increase in service industry output, which rebounded with a growth of 1.1% a month. The sports and leisure industry output also saw a growth of 6.5%. The agency says these figures come as COVID-19 restrictions were eased. During the same period, production in the construction industry saw a hike of 5.9%. Along with overall industry output, corporate investments in equipment jumped 13%, which also contributed to the recovery.
As service industry output continued to be strong, overall industrial production shifted to an increase. Domestic spending has improved along with corporate investments. This has led to an overall economic recovery.
However, retail sales, a barometer for consumer spending, fell slightly by 0.1% a month. This was mainly due to lower demand for semi-durable goods like clothing and entertainment and sports goods, which dropped by 1.2%. Statistics Korea says economic uncertainties remain amid the ongoing Ukraine crisis and the monetary tightening across the globe. 신하영, Arirang News.
In other news, the first of 4 cube-shaped nano-satellites carried into space by South Korea's homegrown launch vehicle Nuri has successfully been ejected. The mini-satellite was released from a performance verification satellite that reached orbit on June 21st. The Ministry of Science and ICT says information from the cube satellite was received early Thursday following separation on Wednesday afternoon. The ministry adds that the small satellite appeared to be spinning around and will need time to find a stable orbit. The 4 cube satellites were developed by local universities for research purposes and are scheduled to be ejected every 2 days. The first one satellite that is released was developed by Chosun University students. The World Health Organization has denounced a recent U.S. ruling that no longer acknowledges the constitutional right to abortion. Speaking to members of the media Wednesday, WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus called the ruling a setback that would cost lives, as decades of scientific data proves safe and legal abortions can save lives. He went on to forecast that many women and girls would suffer from complications and even death owing to unsafe and illegal practices. Last week, the U.S. Supreme Court ended constitutional protections for abortion, which had been in place for almost half a century. On the local cultural front, recent critical acclaim over performances by Korean classical music artists on the international stage has shed fresh light on the training that goes into nurturing such talent here in the country. Well, my colleague Kim Bo-kyung was out and about to find out more.
An 18-year-old pianist who brought the conductor to tears. The youngest ever gold medalist of the Van Cliburn competition is Im Yoon-chan. But Im is not the only Korean to enjoy such accolades recently. Just weeks before Lim's win, violinist Yang Imo became the first Korean winner of the Sibelius violin competition, and cellist Choi Ha-young won the Queen Elizabeth competition. That's making people around the world notice this so-called Korean phenomenon. So how did South Korea become home to these stars? Experts say it's down to the public education system and dedicated teachers. Korea National University of Arts, a state-run specialist institution, is where Im got his classical education.
We figure out each student's strengths and weaknesses and teach them accordingly. We would like to call it customized education.
The state-funded Korea National Institute for the Gifted in Arts serves as a preliminary school for the university. It has been discovering prodigies and giving them lessons for free.
Not just the school itself, and they need to go to these competitions, and there are many other costs. And our school provides many other scholarships besides the school tuition.
Students enter through auditions and get one-on-one lessons from university professors.
We get to learn theories and get to practice basic musical notes, along with taking orchestra and chamber classes.
Education and dedicated teachers are not the only things needed for young artists to bloom. They also need a chance to perform on big stages and use high-quality instruments. And there is one foundation that helps with this.
Since 1993, the Kumu Cultural Foundation lets young classical artists borrow the best quality instruments. Among those who benefited from this is cellist Choi Ha-young. The foundation also offers a debut stage and lets artists hold concerts through its artist-in-residence system. Both pianist Sonu Ye-gon and violinist Yang In-mo have held such concerts.
Young artists especially do not have much chance to be invited to the stage or come up with their own performance program. By being on stage at Kumo Art Hall, they can not only practice their techniques, but also deeply understand their own music spectrum and enhance their creativity.
For more such gifted artists to show their capability, the expert asks public to let them develop.
Ironically, what these artists need is indifference. Legendary pianist Maurizio Pollini disappeared for several years after topping the Chopin piano competition. He broadened his musical boundaries. They need such time. Artists like Lim, they're just in their 20s, only have lived 1/4 of their lives, and we need to help them develop their own traits as artists.
Experts also say now is time to pay attention to other areas like Korea having its own overseas management agency for classical artists and supporting other classical sectors such as orchestras. 김보경, Arirang News.
Let's take a look at what's going on in the world now. 20 people were convicted by a French court on Wednesday in connection to the 2015 Paris attacks. The attacks, which killed 130 and injured 494 people across bars, restaurants and a concert hall in Paris in November 2015, were the deadliest attacks on the capital since World War II. Salah Abdeslam, the sole survivor of 7 members who physically carried out the attacks, was handed a life sentence without parole. The 6 other members were tried in absentia, while the 13 other defendants received prison sentences ranging from 2 to 30 years on lesser charges. The court's conclusion follows a lengthy trial that began in September 2021 and involved 330 lawyers. 20 years after the first allegations came to light, R&B singer R. Kelly has been sentenced to 30 years in prison on charges of sex trafficking and racketeering. The singer was sentenced by a U.S. district court in Brooklyn on Wednesday. It follows a 2021 jury conviction by a New York court that found the 55-year-old guilty on 1 charge of racketeering and 8 counts of violations of the Mann Act, a sex trafficking law that bans the transporting of people across state lines. Public outrage over the singer's sexual misconduct came in the wake of the Me Too movement and the release of the docuseries Surviving R. Kelly. A shootout at a bank in Canada has left 2 gunmen dead and 6 police officers injured. The incident occurred in the town of Saanich in British Columbia after 2 heavily armed gunmen entered a local bank on Tuesday. They were both shot and killed after engaging with officers after exiting the building, with footage of the incident on social media showing dozens of shots fired during the confrontation. 6 officers sustained gunshot wounds and have been hospitalized, with 2 undergoing surgery. Homes in the area were also evacuated after a possible explosive device was discovered in the gunman's vehicle. Outgoing Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett has said he will not run in the upcoming election slated for later this year. Bennett made the announcement on Wednesday after last week announcing he would dissolve the parliament and hold what would be the country's 5th general election in 4 years. Bennett added that he will retain his position as an alternate prime minister after coalition partner Yair Lapid takes the reins of the caretaker government. No date has been set for the elections, as final voting required for the dissolution of parliament has been met with disputes by opposition lawmakers. Matthew Ashley, Arirang News.
Good Thursday afternoon. Relentless rain has battered the Seoul metropolitan area and Gangwon-do province this morning. Now that the rain clouds moved northward, the rain in Seoul has subsided slightly. But don't let your guard down yet, as we'll see more rain up to 150 millimeters in central parts of the country. The heavy rain and flooding has resulted in some road closures, and there are a few more landslide alerts newly issued in Seoul, Gyeonggi-do, and Gangwon-do provinces. So stay alert, and if you think the threat is imminent, warn others and get yourself to safety immediately. While central areas are battling pounding rain, southern parts are dealing with scorching heat. Now that the stationary weather front is heading north, heat advisories might be expanded to portion of central regions. So please do all that you can to stay cool and healthy. And thankfully, the rain comes to a halt on Friday, but it will be sweltering hot again over the weekend with Seoul reaching 32 degrees. Now let's take a look at the worldwide weather conditions.
And on that note, we say goodbye for today. We'll be back with more stories tomorrow, same time. Join us then.